people on who were debating with physicians who were guests on the show as well about the fact that, I might be obese and some even morbidly obese, but my numbers are good and I'm still healthy. But that's bad math. That's not scientifically possible to be morbidly obese and still consider oneself healthy. Hello, and welcome to Awake at the Wheel. So in today's episode, we're going to be discussing the topic of body positivity. So I can hear it now. I know that this is a really touchy subject. For anyone watching on YouTube, you can see me from the shoulders up. I'm a relatively fit, health-conscious individual. So I can hear it now that I'm fat shaming by having this discussion, and that certainly is not the case. I think that there's some real psychological implications that come along with this focus on body positivity, on body image, on body shape, and so on. So I think it's incredibly important to discuss. And Oren, I'm excited for your perspective as a male on this as well. So I think this could be an interesting conversation.
Okay. Well, my perspective to start is, as we've talked about in previous podcasts, that what used to be, let's say, sensible, common sense, health conscious, let's say, evidence-based perspectives on these types of things has now become completely or almost completely politicized. So the best advice, the best recommendations, and the best solutions are not being, or they are being advocated, and the people who do that are being called, hateful, bigoted, fatphobic, blah, 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 blah. Okay. And then they'll throw a whole bunch of other terms that have absolutely nothing to do with anything that we're talking about, but that's the society we live in today. So that's my perspective to begin, and I'm sure we'll unroll a few other ones as well.
Yeah. All right. So I think, to begin with, the idea of body positivity is a good thing. But the challenge that comes along with it is that it can, ironically, paradoxically, sometimes reinforce the idea that our worth does come from the way that we look. So what I mean by that is, I think that this idea was born out of, we don't have to be skinny or look a certain way or whatever to be worthwhile. And now this focus on, well, I can look however I want and I should be approved no matter how I look. I feel like it's basically saying the same thing, but just on the other side of the spectrum. So, first point that I'll make there is the focus is the same, even though it claims to be different. Body positivity tends to emphasize that all bodies are beautiful regardless of their appearance. But there's also this idea of body neutrality that I think maybe is a little bit healthier, or a healthier way to look at it. So body neutrality is looking at the person as a whole. And rather than concentrating on the appearance, it's looking more about the way that the body serves us as humans and the way that our functioning is, rather than the way that we look. So I think that that's a bit of a healthier perspective to take.
I like that. And because when I work with patients, whatever we're dealing with, whether it's about, the body or other health or behavior related issues, I always do say, is it serving your best interest? That's what we really need to look at. And especially, so I've got some young men who are fit, they've got good jobs, blah, blah, blah. Everything's great. But they, let's say, are drinking a little bit too much. All right, not excessively, they're not addicted, and they're not even binge drinking. But after work, every day, they're having a few drinks. And, in the old days, people said, one glass of wine after, a day is good. And they've gone back and forth on whether that is or not. By the way, I've always believed for many, many years, the only benefit of having one glass of wine per day is about stress. If it helps take the edge off, if it reduces your stress, we know stress is the number one killer, either directly or as something that triggers or exacerbates literally all mental and medical conditions, or psychological, emotional, physiological conditions. So I believed that the wine truly, even as a teen, when I heard that, I was like, no, it's because you're reducing stress. That's really it. Okay. So anyway, the point is, but they're having a couple of drinks and maybe their partner doesn't like it, because the partner doesn't want them to be either spending the money, or they know that it's not good for you to have 2 or 3 beers after work every single day. Now they're not getting slovenly drunk. They're not developing a giant beer belly, but it's having some impact. So the point I'm saying is, when I talk with these people, I say something which I even tell them, I go, I know it's not going to work if I just say this, so we need to really work on making it work. All right. But here's what I say. And again, I know we're going a little bit away from the body positivity, but it's the same idea. It's about taking a look at the gestalt, the whole person, and making sure that whatever we're talking about in the end serves your best interest. And so I say, what do people tell young people, okay, who smoke cigarettes? What's the number one thing people tell them, like, why they shouldn't smoke?
It's bad for your health.
Okay, and what's it going to do to you?
It's going to give you lung cancer. It's going to give you COPD, all kinds of different diseases.
Right. And it'll take a couple of years off of your life. That's pretty much proven.
Yes.
Okay. And so for the young person, either they think, well, that can't happen to me because young people think they're invincible, or I can enjoy the cigarette in the moment. More importantly, it's not the cigarette per se for most cases, but the social aspect. I can hang out with my, the friends, and we're all smoking. I remember in high school as well, same thing. It's like we had nothing in common except that we're all smoking. A lot of times we didn't even say anything, but we were all smoking, right? That was the bonding force, right? So I can look at that now and get all the benefits now and everything like that. Or I can project myself into some potential future that may or may not happen, because I don't know for a fact. Maybe science will change. Anyway, the bottom line is, when you're looking at the future versus the now, for most people, the now rules out over the future, especially if you're young. So what I say to the people that I'm working with, especially the young men, women as well, but mostly young men who want to change that certain behavior that they know is having a negative impact. Again, maybe it's only small, right? But they do want to make a change. I say, think about when you're a bit older, if you're going to have kids especially, but, and I ask them what they like to do. If someone likes to travel, I say, well, try traveling. Okay. Try walking around Greece or somewhere else for, 6 or 8 hours a day with an extra 50 to 100 pounds that you don't need. Right. And I say, and it's, whether it's because you've been drinking and it accumulates, or it's something else, like somehow just think about that. Think about something that you want to do, something that's going to be fulfilling, and recognize that whatever you're doing now is going to make it much harder to do. And now some people say, okay, fine, I'll cut it out later. I go, no. When it comes to health, okay, starting now is the best thing that you can do. Getting those habits starting now, trying to do it later. It's always harder later. The longer that you do something, it's the harder to break. And it's just, as we get older, our bodies change. It's harder to, the metabolism slows down, et cetera. So I tell them, start now. And so it does seem to work to some degree. I mean, I'm oversimplifying it. But again, whether we're talking about we're talking about body positivity here, and unhealthy bodies. So whether it's because of drinking, whether it's because of eating, whether it's because of a sedentary lifestyle, whether it's because of lack of exercise, or some other thing that you're doing that's not good for your body, right? You find something that will motivate you to make a positive change. So,
yeah, absolutely. And to that point, with the clients that I work with, one of the biggest tools that I recommend is exercise and diet, because there are so many different health benefits that come along with it. And, sometimes I'll hear things from clients of, well, I don't need to lose weight, but it's not about losing weight. It's about having a healthy body and a healthy brain. And if you happen to lose a couple of pounds, great, but that shouldn't be the focus. It should be on, again, the whole body and how living a healthy lifestyle is going to benefit you long term. So what's interesting is, with this whole body positivity movement, I think the assumption is that it's had some positive impact on the next generation in terms of how they view their bodies. I think that was at least the intention. But I came across a study yesterday, and it's only one study, but I think it's, quite a bit of interesting information. So I'm going to read some of the highlights from it, and we'll link the study in the description. So this was a survey conducted by Harmony Healthcare. So in June of 2023, they surveyed 999 women about their relationship with their body and their body image. So the respondents ranged in age from 18 to 77, with the average age being about 43. 23% of the women surveyed were baby boomers, 25% were Gen X, 26% were millennials, and 26% were Gen Z. So here's where things get interesting. 53% of the Gen Z respondents thought that Barbie represents the ideal body image. So this is crazy to me because I think, my generation, your generation, generations previous, ever since Barbie has been around, I know that Barbie has been named as a problematic figure in the world in terms of unrealistic body image. So it would stand to reason that with this change in focus on, all bodies are beautiful, all shapes and sizes are beautiful, but more than half of these people in the youngest generation surveyed still think that that's ideal. So that's a huge, huge disconnect in my opinion. But I'll read some more of the stats here. 79% of the women that were surveyed have dealt with negative body image. 80% of the women that were surveyed have called themselves fat. 1 in 4, so 28% of the women had dealt with disordered eating by doing things such as restricting their eating, or eating compulsively or eating irregularly. And let's see what else we've got here. So there's actually a chart, and you'll see in the link when we share this, if you do choose to look at it further, it points out the different parts of Barbie. And what it's saying here is that the respondents indicated what parts of the body women tend to compare themselves most to with Barbie. So 26% compared the face, 28% compared hair, 27% compared chest, 42% compared the waist, 15% the butt, and 18% arms, legs 34%, and 9% compared feet. So my emphasis on the statement of that percentage of people focusing on the waist, it's been common knowledge, I think, again, since the existence of Barbie, that those proportions are completely unrealistic. I remember seeing something that if a person actually was shaped like that, they would tip over. And yet, even though this is common knowledge, this is still happening. So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I hope that people can recognize that, young people are susceptible to bad information. And part of that is social contagion. And this whole body positivity, there's social contagion. People are hearing some really bad messaging, whether it's you're okay the way that you are, even if it's unhealthy, or this is the ideal to look for, And as you say, for so many years, that is disheartening. I think it's really a take home here that all these years of messaging and the thing is, though, I don't know if those 53% of people who said, or the young people who said that that's the ideal body image. If you ask them, okay, it's ideal, but ideal also means unrealistic usually. Like it's, because that's when I talk to people like the ideal self. It's a perfect self, but it's also unrealistic. So why would you strive for something that's impossible and unrealistic? So I wonder if they could sort of reconcile the things there. Like they say, oh, it'd be great if I looked like that, but I know it's not possible. Right. Because even if they said that, I'd say, okay, that mitigates my concerns quite a bit. Right. Because if they find that attractive, hey, all the power to you. Like there's nothing wrong with finding it attractive, but aspiring to become like that, that's where we get in trouble. So yeah, that's again, and just to show that after all these decades of campaigning, messaging, education, that still they're saying this. Once again, parents, understand this is what your kids are seeing, whether it's this or some other thing that we've talked about, and they're hearing it every single day. They're seeing it every single day. There was a woman who they call her Barbie, who had all that cosmetic surgery, I think she had ribs removed. It's just she made herself look like Barbie physically, right? And I don't know if people look at her as an inspiration or if they feel sorry for her or if they mock her. I'm not quite sure what the general sentiment is toward her, right? But that's an extreme manifestation of these unhealthy beliefs. But it does happen. And again, some kids, even if they don't aspire to be like that, if seeing that as the ideal and knowing they can never reach it, if that causes them a sense of distress, a sense of futility or hopelessness and shame, that's a problem as well.
Yeah. And I think, the converse, or at least related to that, is this now promotion of obesity being healthy. And these aren't my words. This is something that I've seen in a lot of content online. There's a whole episode of Dr. Phil where he had people on who were debating with physicians who were guests on the show as well about the fact that, I might be obese, and some even morbidly obese, but my numbers are good and I'm still healthy. But that's bad math. That's not scientifically possible to be morbidly obese and still consider oneself healthy. So again, these are some of the messages that kids are being exposed to as well, that you're perfect the way that you are, and you don't have to strive for better. You don't have to strive for health. And in fact, it is healthy if you're obese. Like, my brain can't compute that.
Well, my brain can, sadly. Okay. And okay, not that it makes sense. Okay. This is some really bizarre, I wouldn't call it voodoo math. I don't know what it would call it, but anyway, yes. So yeah, it makes literally no sense. But in people's minds, somehow they are taking the easy route where if someone in authority or someone that I look up to is saying something is okay, then I'm just going to blindly accept it. And if you challenge it, you're hateful, bigoted, fatphobic, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And here's the interesting thing. If you ever watch people say that, it's quite fascinating, because this is not isolated. This body positivity is definitely not some, again, it's connected to a whole bunch of other movements that we're seeing in society today. Because when you hear people say fatphobic, a string of other words that have nothing to do with body comes out of their mouths, right? And so this ties to whether we say the oppressor oppressed, let's say the normalized versus the marginalized, okay, the white versus everybody else, whatever you want to, however you want to frame it, there is this perspective that if you're in the non-privileged, quote unquote, group, right, then by nature you are a better person and you deserve a lot more, let's say, leeway and a lot more privilege, ironically, than the other people do. And it is all tied together.
And if I can interject for a second. So I've actually personally been accused of having thin privilege or some bullshit like that. And it's like, excuse me, no, I work out for 3 hours a week. I eat really well. I prepare healthy foods. Like, I am intentional about my good health. That's not privilege. That's self-discipline, right? But for that to be thrown at me as me doing something wrong or being less than, because it's such a bizarre concept to me. So I wanted to jump in and say that is a real, absolutely real thing that's happened and something that I've experienced. It's very bizarre.
It's bizarre, and it's also so damaging, because that's what the young people today are seeing, and older people as well. But you would expect older people to know better, but a lot of them aren't. They're adopting it. They're promulgating it, which is, no, you don't have to work on yourself. You don't have to do anything. You were born, unfortunately, you were born with these, let's say, deficits. We won't even call it that, though, of course. It's no, those other people were born with these privileges. That's what the focus is on. And how dare they say anything, because they don't deserve to say anything. They should sit down, shut up, because they are privileged. And again, this is a perfect example, like you said. Yeah, you're not born with this. Now, here's the thing. And I've seen doctors say this, or at least one, and there have been a few, I'm putting quotation marks around doctors, okay, who said, and it was an interview, and it became famous, where the person basically said that no, diet is essentially body size is 100% due to genetics, nothing to do with lifestyle choices that you make. And that's insane. And this is what you and I have talked about since the day one of this podcast about a year ago, which is that people take these black and white perspectives. Are some people born with genetics that either make them makes them obese, no matter what they do, their body type, like they can try to lose weight, but they're always going to have a certain structure, okay, a certain size, like a range, and it's never going to be in that thin range, okay, no matter what they do. Okay, or they have other genetic or biological obstacles that make it impossible to do these kinds of things. Or, and we know this for a fact, many people, again, they're born with this, where they get a different reaction to the sight or the smell of food, or even the taste. So it's harder for them to exert discipline. No doubt So yes, and now I don't think that we found the polygenetic code for people who are born with that either makes them averse to food or makes them less desiring of it. Whatever. So okay, so maybe those people were born with a privilege. If you want to say that, but there's a billion different types of privileges that we can find. Let's stop with this stupid language. Okay, does privilege exist?
Yeah.
Yes, it does in certain contexts, and we can't deny it. But it's being thrown around recklessly. And again, the thin privilege, it's ridiculous. Okay.
And if I can add to that, to draw this back to me, what is hilarious about that is this is a perfect example of people not looking at the whole person. Let's not forget, I have a significant physical deficit that limits me in a great deal of contexts across my life. So I've made the choice to optimize every other area of my life in so far as my physical health, right? So if we look at me as a whole, there's some significant deficit, which is why I've chosen to do things the way that I do. So it's just so counterintuitive and, again, black and white to look at it as, well, you have thin privilege. No, there's a lot more to it than that.
Right. And again, you're choosing to do something about it. There's choice and there's control. And what we see in all of these changes recently in society, whether it's about thin privilege or all the other stuff I mentioned about the marginalized and so on, or the unprivileged, is that they are basically not encouraging people to take control over things that they do have control over. So again, if somebody is unable to exercise the way that we would want them to because they have a very bad back or whatever else, okay, or they don't have resources, they can't afford a gym, fine. It's going to be harder for you, but it's not impossible. Find something where you do have control and try to exercise 1% more control, 5%, 10%. Build on it, because there are things that you can do to help yourself. And again, it all starts with personal agency, personal responsibility, personal accountability, whatever word you want to use. But there has to be some room for that. And so many supposed experts are denying that, which is ridiculous. And one thing, somebody, I forget who it was, actually I think I know who it was, but they had an X or a Twitter posting maybe last month. And I don't want to make fun of the people that they were, I don't know if they were making fun. It did seem like they were mocking a little bit. But what they showed all these quote unquote fat influencers or body positivity influencers. Okay. And they showed a list of them and they had all died at a very young age. Oh. Okay. You think there's a coincidence? No. And again, it's not to make fun of somebody like that. It's not to shame someone. It's to say, as you said earlier, there are consequences to actions or inactions. And we have to bring those consequences back into the dialogue and help people say, I want to avoid those consequences, or I want to benefit from the privilege, quote unquote. I'm using that sarcastically for those who aren't keeping track. Okay? Yeah. But the benefits that you can accrue from making good decisions. And again, I'll say it over and over. And the fact that we have to keep saying it over and over is sad. But if we don't, people are going to accuse us of being simplistic and et cetera, et cetera. But the fact is, yes, there are many obstacles that can make it harder for people to do what they need to do to live a healthier life. But those obstacles are not insurmountable. They just make it harder. And just looking and saying, well, that person was born with good genes and they have lots of money, so they have a gym, they have a personal trainer, whatever, so it's unfair. Well, maybe it's unfair, maybe. But again, that shouldn't, their lives should not dictate how you conduct your own.
Precisely, yeah. And it's so interesting, that people can see one end of the spectrum one way, but the other, they're completely closed off to seeing it in the same fashion. And what I'm getting at here is that I think that it's come to be accepted that, severely limiting food and restricting food and, being severely underweight is unhealthy. In fact, the DSM, which is the manual that we use to diagnose psychological conditions, recognizes that, anorexia as a disorder. But why aren't we looking at persistent overeating? Obesity is not in the DSM, even though, and there's actually a paragraph in the eating disorder section that says something along the lines of, they recognize that obesity is not a psychological condition. But meanwhile, they also say that there are many behavioral components that lead to it. So, just an observation that seems really interesting to me, but I want to draw some similarities here. And I'm not saying, one thing or the other here, but just an observation. So I want to read one of the criteria related to to anorexia, and certainly not taking this out of context, but again, just observing some similarities between promoting obesity and what the DSM says about anorexia. The DSM says that there is a disturbance in the way in which one's body weight or shape is experienced, as well as undue influence of body weight or shape on self-evaluation, or a persistent lack of recognition of the seriousness of the current low body weight. If we swapped in the word high body weight, like, I feel like the two are almost identical. And again, this is only one of the criteria, but still.
That's an excellent point, right? Yes, if you don't recognize that there's something unhealthy going on, there's something wrong. And now, again, if young people, as you said, we've said this so many times, good intentions executed poorly lead to disastrous, in this case, fatal outcomes, which is, if we're trying to help younger generations not feel ashamed, not get an obsession over how they look, and not engage in really unhealthy perspectives and behaviors, which would constitute eating disorders and body image issues. That's a great goal. But we're going to see the opposite, where people who do, as again, to your point, if these young people are not recognizing that there is an unhealthy behavior and consequence, right? And even if it's not a behavior, even if, again, genetically, somehow, unfortunately, they're born and they're eating all the right foods and everything like that. But if they just say, well, it's okay, and they're not recognizing that this is going to have a negative impact on them and on their lives and their well-being, it's exactly it. It would be a disorder, right? And by the way, for anyone who doesn't, who wants to call us out on this, obesity is not in the DSM, but binge eating disorder is. And right, binge eating disorder, that's a specific type of behavior. That's like, taking a massive amount in a short period of time versus somebody who's just constantly eating. That's not binge eating. That's just someone who has, or is eating the wrong types of food and is not exercising and so on. So I think that obesity, and if, by the way, in the DSM, in almost every disorder, if not every disorder, there's always the one of the criteria is that it can't be attributed to a medical condition. So even for people saying, well, it's not fair, why are you calling obesity a mental disorder? If it's due to a medical condition, right, then we would rule it out. But if somebody, again, has a perspective, a mindset, an inability to, to live a healthier life, and we're not talking about being a little bit overweight, we're talking obesity, or even if we are talking about, it's just anything that has a negative impact on your physical, psychological, emotional, mental well-being. Why are we not addressing it? And by the way, to that point, doctors now, right, are terrified. They are getting complaints because, God forbid, a patient comes in. And by the way, if you listen on TikTok or on Instagram or any of these other videos, you will see so many people making these videos and they're bragging about how they told off their doctor, or they're sitting in bed with their covers up saying, I was traumatized today because I came in and I said, my back is hurting, or I have I can't breathe, or like A, B, C, D. And my doctor dared mention my weight. So now if a doctor even mentions it, they are at risk of getting a complaint. No joke. They are at risk of getting a complaint because they were, let's say, subjecting the patient to undue, mental trauma or harm by talking about weight.
And that's scary, right? And, before we started recording, you and I even lamented that we need to be careful about what we're talking about here because we don't want to get in trouble. But the fact remains is that the science supports that a healthy physically active lifestyle, healthy diet is correlated to so many health conditions, either, resolving or mitigating or causing. So, this isn't just something that people are pulling out of thin air. The science has supported it for decades upon decades that living a healthy lifestyle is only in our best interest. And I know I'm talking a lot about myself here, but I'm doing this as a preface of, I get it. It's hard work. I lost 50 pounds. This is before you knew me, but I was 50 pounds heavier than I am now after I had my kids. So I understand that there's a lot of work and discipline and not wanting to do the hard work to get to a certain goal. But again, it's about recognizing what is going to be long-term most beneficial for you, for your family, for the people that you support, whatever your role is in life. Being healthy is important. And I talk about self-discipline a lot because I think that self-discipline is a huge part of this. And this isn't to say that people who are overweight are lazy. I'm not saying anything like that whatsoever. Right. So let me be abundantly clear. But there is a strong connection between self-discipline and being able to do hard work and do hard things. And what we're finding nowadays is that there is a bit of an easier way out through things like Ozempic. And I think Wegovy is the weight loss equivalent of that. And a lot of people are gravitating towards that. So it's interesting and almost contradictory where on the one hand, people are saying body positivity, but then there's such a huge amount of the population going to this quick fix of these injections.
Right. And we're seeing that, as often happens with pharmaceuticals, there are side effects. There are some, and more counterindications. And unfortunately, a lot of people are going to end up suffering because, they already have, if you have certain conditions, don't take this Ozempic or other, drugs, but there's always going to be more and that we're not aware of. And there are going to be, again, the pharmaceuticals, we know this. I don't want to make this into a pharmaceutical rant, but profits come first. And so we know that a lot of people who think they're taking the easy way out are going to find out that no, there was a catch in many cases, right? And speaking of pharmaceuticals, I don't want to get into conspiracy theory territory, but there is something that I think needs to be brought up, which is at the very beginning of COVID. Now, anyone who claims to say, if they say, I knew this or that, I knew this was wrong, I knew this would be right and everything, well, you're lying to yourself because nobody knew. And to this date, we still don't know completely. But one thing that many people were saying, and they were shut down as soon as they said it, they were saying that, yes, for, let's say, old people with certain immunocompromising conditions, people with diabetes, or guess what, overweight people, they were the most prone to the worst effects of COVID. And nowhere at first were you able to say that. The news was not saying, hey, by the way, right, if you get outside, get vitamin D and exercise, you will help, let's say, make yourself more, you can help prevent. You'll still get COVID, but you can help reduce the effects of COVID. That was not allowed to be said. Now, recently, 4 years later, now they're talking about it a little bit. But that was something, and you have to wonder that there's no way that doctors and other practitioners were not aware of this. So there was a huge push or a prevention by either the governments, pharmaceuticals, somebody. And again, it might sound like conspiracy, but ask yourself, why wasn't, again, the even just the weight part, why wasn't that addressed and why wasn't that promoted? Now, you might say, again, in vitamin D as well, people are told to stay inside, which is the exact wrong thing to do. You should have been outside, even if you're not, congregating in large masses, but getting outside, getting the sun and so on, right? That vitamin D was essential, as was, again, body size. Healthy bodies. Okay. Yeah. And then I'm just going to take that to one more step, which is you talked about decades and decades of research, showing conclusively how healthy body, healthy mind, and so on, and vice versa. Well, and it was decades of research, but we've known for hundreds, if not thousands of years, the mind-body connection. And when your body is functioning properly, we know that serotonin is formed in the gut. Now, I'm not a medical doctor and a scientist, I'm a soft scientist, but right. So if you have a large body and you're not eating properly, and that's what's contributing to the large body, then you're affecting the microbes in your gut. You're affecting the production of serotonin, and it's a terrible feedback effect. If you exercise, you'll feel a bit better. Feeling better will lead to more ability to exercise, eat properly, et cetera, making good decisions, and so on. Less self-destructive behaviors, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And that will again keep fueling the positive, the mind, the mood, and then the activities. So it's incontrovertible. Having a healthier lifestyle will have positive impacts in every area of your life. You cannot deny that. So for anybody who does deny that, ask yourself, why would they do that? Either as a financial incentive, or it's self-serving because that person, they're projecting themselves onto everybody else, and they don't, they want to be able to, they want to be accepted. They want everyone to buy their self-narrative that says, I am the way I am because it's not my fault, and so on, right? And or the third one is it's an ideological capture or ideological possession, okay, that they bought into it, again, the marginalized, the oppressed, et cetera. And somehow this just that's just a piece in the puzzle. Whatever the case is, It's not based on science. It's not based on facts. It's not based on evidence. And it's not based on what's in your best interest.
Yeah. And at the end of the day, this is yet another issue where professionals can't do their job because of politics.
Exactly.
Like it's crazy. It's absolutely crazy. But with all this said, I think, and we didn't specifically say, but I think that a lot of people will attribute what we're discussing here to females and how this affects females. But young boys, males, men of all ages are being affected by this as well, and the messages that are being put out to them about how they should look or shouldn't look. So I just wanted to add that in there too, that this isn't exclusive to females. It does also affect males.
And this is not to make, this is just to show the evidence. It's not a political statement at all. Okay. Previously, all the research that I saw showed that, yes, the vast majority of people with eating disorders or body image issues were women. It was like 90-something% were women. 90 to 95% of women, depending on what disorder we're looking at, were females. And I'm saying women, but it's also girls, unfortunately, right? So females. And interestingly, the vast majority of males, or I should say the majority of males who had certain body image issues or eating disorders just happen to be gay or bisexual males. Okay, just
interesting.
Okay, it's interesting. So whether it's something about biological or whether it's about the social influence, what they're seeing. Okay, because a gay young male will be looking at other materials or resources than a straight male. But now now the numbers are changing because let's say the messaging to straight males changed as well, as you're saying, where there's this thing called, it's not in the DSM, but it was called, or coined bigorexia. So males had this distorted image, no matter how big they got, no matter how cut, ripped, or whatever, somehow it wasn't enough. And they were injecting themselves, and they still are, with silicone and all these other substances that are unhealthy. And there's some tragic stories, or they're taking steroids or testosterone or other things. So now the number of males who have, and I don't have the exact numbers with me, but the numbers who have some type of body image issue, or disordered, I'm going to say either eating or putting substances in their body, right? It is increasing significantly. So nobody is immune to, let's say, consistent messaging from the right sources. If they see people that they look up to and so on, and they have these ideal bodies or supposedly ideal bodies, and they're getting the messages, there was the Liver King, right? What was the guy who was just supposedly only eating liver, and he had this just like impossible body, and saying, oh, it's all natural just through liver, right? How many people bought into that, right? So again, people have to understand, if you think, male, female, gay, straight, I don't care what you are. If you think that you are a rational being, you're lying to yourself. We are emotional beings. We have we are so easily influenced and persuaded. And we have to recognize that. So, we always talk about what can you do about it? Recognize that there's so much messaging going on these days. Sometimes malicious and manipulative. Other times it's just a person thinks they're saying the right things and they think that they're giving a positive message, but it's unhealthy. Recognize that you're constantly, with social media, more than at any other point in the history of humanity, we are getting so much messaging from so many different sources that we're just taking it as fact. So people are having a hard time stepping back and thinking critically about what they're hearing and seeing. So please recognize you are not a rational being. None of us is. We can bring rational thought to the picture or to the situation, but that's not our default. Our default is, emotion. We're not thinking, we're just taking it in and we're going along and treating it as fact. So please step back, do some research, look into what the healthiest, ways of living are. Okay. Recognize that you ask 1,000 experts, you're going to get probably 998 different pieces of advice. Nothing's perfect. Find what works for you. Don't aspire to impossible ideals. Just try to build it wherever you are now. Try to be 1% healthier, whether it's through the diet and or the exercise. Another choice is sleep, something we always talk about as well, like getting proper sleep, reducing stress, most important, just finding ways to reduce stress, right? So start 1%, 2%, 5%, build, find what works for you, but don't just sit there passively saying, well, can't help it. And you're fat phobic for saying that I should do something about it. We're not shaming. Nobody is shaming. And by the way, if someone does shame you, then shame on them. Okay. They shouldn't shame you, which by the way, I think we talked about this in another podcast. I know many people who have said, I'm glad I was body shamed. That's the only thing that got me into gear. And I finally did. And I'm not advocating it. I'm just saying some people, they needed that kick in the ass, and that's what got them to finally make the changes they needed to. So anyway, that's my
Yeah. But yeah, as far as what people can do, I will echo all of that, because that's what it does come down to, is identifying what is a healthy lifestyle and how can you implement that into your life in a realistic fashion, right? So don't strive for 100 all at once. Little by little, find areas that you can improve upon and go from there, and recognize that it's not about the way that you look. Perhaps, again, that could be a happy byproduct. If that's something that you're striving for, great. But it's about being the healthiest person that you can be, physically, psychologically, and otherwise. And again, that term body neutrality, I think, is a good way to frame all of this, is looking at what you can do to optimize the functioning of your body as a whole, not just focusing on the way that you look, whether it's heavy, light, somewhere in between. That should not be the focus. But to our listeners, we want to know what you think about body positivity. Do you think it's a good thing? Is it a bad thing? Let us know what you think about this discussion.
And finally, if you are hoping to take steps to somehow change bad habits, we did the podcast, the New Year's resolutions, I believe, and we talked about step by step the best way to improve your chances of making any positive changes in your life. So please check out that video. And until next time, keep your eyes on the road and your hands upon the wheel.